There is a great deal of immense activity happening around the Ring of Fire this month, which has both seismologists and volcanologists on pins and needles. On November 27th, a code red alert was set into motion on the resort island of Bali, where the restless Mount Agung volcano has been spewing volcanic ash with increasing intensity since November 21st. With heightened seismic activity and confirmation that the volcano is shifting into a magmatic phase, authorities have issued a warning to 100,000 individuals who are living in proximity to the volcano to evacuate the area. Mount Agung has been spewing ash continuously, accompanied by explosive eruptions, with thunderous sounds being heard as far as 7.5 miles from the summit. The danger zone is dynamic and is being continuously evaluated. The last major eruption of this volcano was in January of 1963, measuring 5 out of 7 on the Volcanic Explosivity Index, and was responsible for the deaths of 1,600 people. This is a big one, with big implications for Indonesia and the South Pacific, where the potential for a catastrophic eruption is imminent. Meanwhile, closer to home, the Popocatépetl volcano, located in Mexico, saw its strongest eruption in 4 years during Thanksgiving of 2017. The explosion was so strong that it was registered from seismic stations located as far away as 12 kilometers from the base of the volcano. Here is the video capture of this holiday eruption in real time, taken from the Webcam de Mexico on November 23rd. Earlier this month, the deadliest earthquake so far in 2017 hit at the border of Iran and Iraq, registering a magnitude 7.3. According to geological officials in Japan, this seismic event was so significant that it actually raised the surface of the ground nearly 3 feet, or roughly 90 centimeters, as shown by these images captured from the land observation satellite Dachi 2. The officials say their analysis suggests the ground sank up to 30 centimeters near the epicenter. Land rose 10 to up to 90 centimeters over a stretch of about 80 kilometers south of the epicenter. The officials say the data is almost in line with analysis by the USGS. The U.S. agency said seismic waves indicated the quake was caused by reverse faulting, in which layers of rock shift at an angle. Data suggests the ground swelled by about 40 centimeters in western Iran, where many buildings collapsed. Large ground deformation appears to have caused the powerful tremor. This is yet another indication that powerful forces are at work that will forever change the landscape of our world. Right here in our own backyard, there are reports surfacing from FEMA that the worst natural disaster in the nation's history now has a 1 in 3 chance of happening. I'm referring to the Pacific Northwest, which includes Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver. It is known as the Cascadia Subduction Zone, and it is a much larger threat to the nation as a whole, irrespective of the Yellowstone caldera or the New Madrid fault zone. This fault zone is where the Juan de Fuca plate meets the North American plate, which stretches for 700 miles from Vancouver Island to Northern California. Periodically in its history, an event called a full margin rupture occurs, which is as devastating as one could imagine. The last event of this magnitude occurred back in 1700. A tremendous earthquake so large that it created a massive tsunami that wiped out a large section of coastal Japan, which is thousands of miles across the Pacific. FEMA continues to indicate that the Pacific Northwest is overdue for another disaster of epic proportions. An earthquake that could reach 9 or 10 on the Richter scale. When this happens, cities such as Seattle, Vancouver, and Portland will suffer what is described as the worst natural calamity in the history of North America. Now, if you were to consider how epic this event could be, FEMA has indicated that at the very least, tens of thousands of people would die. There would be more than 1 million homeless, and 2.5 million would be in desperate need of food and medical supplies. So the chances of a big earthquake happening there at any given moment stands at 1 in 3, while the chances of an apocalyptic earthquake in the range of 9 or 10 on the scale stands at 10 to 1. In either scenario, the odds of this happening in our lifetime are very good, which should keep those who live in these regions a reason to worry or to cause sleepless nights. There is an equally dangerous region outside of the Pacific Northwest that has the very real potential to cause havoc to a sector of the country. Back in 1811 and in the following year of 1812, a series of over 1,000 earthquakes rocked the Mississippi River between St. Louis and Memphis. The quakes were so powerful that they caused the river to run backwards for a period of time. That was over 200 years ago. Today, scientists are saying that the New Madrid seismic zone, which is more than 120 miles long, has at least a 40% chance of a terrifying blast in our near future that would severely affect these 5 states. The shaking would be felt well beyond this region. Ultimately, a devastating blow in this area would damage more than 700,000 buildings and would leave more than 2.5 million people without power for an extended time. Unlike California, which has been hit by a number of powerful earthquakes since 1906, the New Madrid fault area has been sitting idly by for more than 200 years. Because of this, those people who reside in the bordering states around the fault zone are not properly prepared for a major earthquake. And the infrastructure that is in disrepair and crumbling in this area will not withstand the impact of a major seismic event. Even more discerning than the 40% chance of an earth-shaking event is that the fault has an impact zone which is 10 times as big as the San Andreas Fault. And this, much like the Cascadia zone, is a disaster in waiting. When measuring the intensity of the 1811 earthquake in the New Madrid region, using what is known as the Mercalli intensity scale between 1 and 10, where 1 is instrumental and 10 is disastrous, the USGS determined that the area that experienced damaging earth motion equal to or greater than 7 was estimated to be around 600,000 square kilometers, whereas shaking greater than 5 occurred in an area of 2.5 million square kilometers. So again, the effects of an earthquake of greater magnitude can be felt far and wide, which was the case with the earthquake of 1811 and 1812. So for our viewers and subscribers who live in these seismically active regions of the country, it is imperative that you have an earthquake plan. My recommendation is that you do not wait too long on this. Seismic and volcanic events are building up to a point where anything can and will happen, and being prepared may be the difference between being safe or being sorry. The earth is shifting beneath our feet, and with this reality comes the obvious observations of a crustal movement. We are seeing on an almost daily basis across the globe the ground opening and swallowing everything in its path. The latest example can be found in Brazil, where a giant crater measuring more than 20 meters, which is some 65 feet, suddenly and without warning opened up on November 5th. This is another sign that the ground around us is shifting as the Earth's inner core heats up and as the outer core begins to expand. Now take a look at these astonishing photos of the immense sinkhole in Coromandel, Brazil, and consider, if you will, how insecure the ground beneath our feet has become, which is one of the reasons why I conclude the video presentations by saying that we should be mindful of our surroundings at all times. There was a phenomenal event in our not-so-distant past that severely affected many people in the American Midwest in the 1930s, at the peak of the Great Depression. And I'm not referring to the financial collapse, but rather to the environmental and humanitarian catastrophe that incurred as a result of the worst drought in U.S. history, which was called the American Dust Bowl. There are some people today who still believe that the Great American Dust Bowl was a once-in-a-generation event that is unlikely to occur in our future. But scientists are not so convinced. They now believe that the Dust Bowl is coming back, and this time its consequences will be felt for decades. The southwestern United States typically experiences a severe drought at least once and possibly twice in a century, which would suggest that the country is overdue for another dry event, considering that it has been almost 80 years since the end of the last great drought in the United States. The chance of a multi-decade drought hitting the heartland within the next century is upwards of 80%. A drought that could last 35 years could make the 1930s Dust Bowl seem trivial. So what would a megadrought look like in America's heartland? If you would picture the movie Mad Max, where toxic dust storms are raging across the region and making driving a deadly ordeal, the vast majority of trees have either died or are on the verge of dying, where farming and agriculture have become virtually impossible. Meantime, in the American West, a searing megadrought would cause massive water shortages, while wildfires would devastate states such as California and Arizona. This is precisely what scientists have anticipated will happen if a drought that supersedes the 1930 Dust Bowl were to actually occur. If we take time to observe our surroundings, we then begin to understand that the probability of a megadrought is becoming more likely at each turn. No one seems to be aware of this or concerned about it, but unless we beat the odds, that day will come, and we should get ready. Not long ago, I mentioned how events on the Earth are behaving abnormally. In retrospect, our planet is behaving unpredictably, in a manner that we are unaccustomed to. As we move from one season to the next, we would expect the transition to happen normally. But this is not always the way it works, and this erratic behavior that we see today is progressively getting worse. A perfect example of such anomalous behavior was recently experienced on the island of Hawaii, where an unusual early snowstorm blanketed the top of the volcanic mountain of Mauna Kea with more than 8 inches of snow, saturating the summit with icy rain, as well as creating whiteout conditions. Although it is not uncommon for the highest volcanic summit on the Big Island to experience snowfall, where temperatures can drop well below freezing, but the timing is much earlier than anticipated, and so this anomalous weather event would yet again indicate that the Earth's climate is changing. With the winter solstice now approaching, we should remind ourselves just how quickly weather conditions can change, where unexpected circumstances can create havoc while catching many off guard. In 1913, an extraordinary event happened in the Great Lakes region. That year, an extratropical cyclone called the November Witch, where 2 storm tracks converged, was responsible for creating hurricane-force gales, whiteouts, and colossal waves. It was unlike any winter storms that those on the Great Lakes had ever seen. During a 4-day span, the so-called White Hurricane caused a dozen major shipwrecks, becoming the greatest U.S. inland maritime disaster to date. Cleveland and other major cities nearby were annihilated by the event, buried in many feet of snow. When the White Hurricane ended its spree, the death toll was over 250. Although this event was colossal in its development and in its aftermath, there was something positive that came out of the horrific storm. Because of the fact that everyone had been caught off guard by this disaster, this anomalous event led to rapid improvements in both storm preparedness and in weather predictions. It proved to be especially effective some 100 years later when Hurricane Sandy merged into a superstorm. If it had not been for the lessons learned in the White Hurricane of 1913, the effects of Hurricane Sandy along the Atlantic seaboard could have been far worse. As we move forward in our journey, there are many things yet to be learned. We must not forget our past, for history teaches us many things that we can use as building blocks for the future. But if we fail to adhere to the lessons that history taught us, then we are destined to repeat the same mistakes that our forefathers made many years ago. With so much happening in today's world, we must not turn a blind eye or a deaf ear to the changes that are happening on this fragile earth. We must move forward with both an open mind and a pure heart. And so, my friends, stay informed, be mindful of your surroundings at all times, but most importantly, keep looking to the sky.